night. I am so thrilled to be having our full cast back, or at least we got three of us, so that's pretty awesome. We've got
Yep.
John, my co-creator here on the Birkin Conservative. Welcome. How you?
Cheers.
Cheers. I am pouring a big fat one. This is a let's see, Ridgeway Brewing Reindeer's Revolt. It's this is like straight up. I've been saving this since Christmas, clearly, and I'm celebrating because we're getting our whole show back. We just had an amazing debate about welfare between libertarian, liberal, and myself as the conservative. It was fascinating as we got into the nuances of that and the COVID relief and everything. But I
hmm
am thrilled to have Josh back from Saving Elephants. Welcome back, Josh.
Good to be here. It feels like it's been an eternity.
It had, because we
I
had
know.
Valentine's Day and we all took some time off for that, to be with our significant others, which was awesome. And then there was like the Super Bowl weekend, and then I took my family out. We went to a wedding last weekend and stuff like that. So I'm thrilled to be able to kind of get back into the mode of this. And the other thing is I'm so excited because we're starting to get past the election and all of that, and it just seems like it just dragged on and on for weeks, and there was the voter fraud, and then there was the riots, and just like so it was just exhausting,
Yeah.
and then I had COVID over Christmas, and I know Kyle, just had it. He just got over it. So many people I know are still struggling with it, and it felt like the last 2 months dragged, and then we get to this show, and it's so much fun to kind of get back into a sense of routine and to be able to talk about what we want, because at least for the moment, it doesn't seem like the world is falling apart. I mean, I guess we'll see what tomorrow brings. But for tonight, I'm going to have a beer and I'm going to enjoy it. So
Exactly. I'm drinking a sweet baby Jesus. It is a chocolate peanut butter porter from Duclaw. Wes, I think you've had it once before.
yes, it is
You had it?
more than slightly heretical and blasphemous, but what, the beer itself is to die for. Can I say that?
Right. There's also its partner of sweet baby Java. I
Yes.
think is
Yeah.
the coffee version with peanut butter in it, which has
Delicious.
a little bit too much complex of flavor profile. But the sweet baby Jesus is like the sweet spot between chocolate and peanut butter, which I really like.
Yeah, no, now we're starting to come out of winter, at least down here in Florida we are, so it's starting to get warmer, but it's still it's in that period where you can have pretty much any beer on the menu, right? You can wheat, you can have heavy, like whatever you want, because the weather's changing every day. So I love going from stouts to like wheat beer and stuff like that in the same couple days. But today, kind of getting into the topics that we want to talk about, is that's kind of where I see the show going over the next several months, is we can kind of go into some of these deeper studies or looks at people that we want to talk about. So whether that's authors or philosophers or anybody that we want to like bring to the forefold. And I think one of them would be G.K. Chesterton, that we have been talking about before. We've mentioned him on this show. Obviously, guy who had many incredible works, wrote so many books, and I think it'd be fun to discuss it. I know, John, you have a particular passion for him and have read several of his works, right?
Yeah, G.K. Chesterton was an author that I was introduced to after I read a little bit of C.S. Lewis. So everyone, Wes, in the most Protestant circles, like C.S. Lewis is like up here. He is like the author of Aslan, right? He authored God himself in fantasy. Like, obviously C.S. Lewis is a phenomenal theologian on his own right, wrote Mere Christianity. But it turns out that C.S. Lewis, before he was a Christian, read G.K. Chesterton. And that's what turned him on a little bit more towards thinking that Christianity had a little bit more going for it than just your typical Sunday school answers. So G.K. Chesterton was special to me, reading him through late high school, college, and just getting a different perspective of Christianity that I didn't have. G.K. Chesterton was an Anglican who turned Catholic during his life. And I thought those were some very, very cool perspectives that he brought to his writings.
Yeah, and I know one of them that you've read and talked about before is Everlasting Man. Is that right?
Yeah, and Josh, are you reading Everlasting Man too, or have you read some sections of it?
I've not. I own Everlasting Man, and I'll get around to it someday, but I've not yet had the pleasure.
Yeah, well, let me give you a little brief on just G.K. Chesterton and then also the Everlasting Man, because G.K. Chesterton was a late 19th century, early 20th century writer. He was a philosopher. Definitely would call him a theologian. He was an art and literary critic as well. He was just kind of a jack of all trades in that realm. Pacifist. He did not want to serve in World War One. He also was probably too fat to serve in World War One. There was some lady who was like, walking up to him and being like, "Hey, dude, how come you're not over at the front? Fighting with all your boys." He's like, "Well, if you actually come over on this side of me, you'll see that I already am out at the front." So he was a jokester. If you read his writings, he is almost downright like childishly silly. But that is part of the unique element in his theology, is that he has such a childish wonder of God. He isn't in it for the answers that God gives him. He's in it for the questions and the continual riddles that God gives him, which I'll touch on later. But if you begin reading The Everlasting Man is almost like a rebuttal against H.G. Wells' The Outline of History. And The Outline of History was where H.G. Wells, in a very, atheistic kind of way, pretty much portrays man as just being this animal, someone who's just trying to meet his base needs. And so Chesterton felt obligated to kind of write his own history of humanity, but with certain locus points. And the first thing he wanted to really pin on was that man is extremely unique. Man is there's nothing, and there's never will be anything like man, and it's a good thing. Man has a lot of good qualities about him. And then the second thing is that there's no one quite like Christ, who is the everlasting man. So where I think Chesterton was unique at that point was that he was kind of combating a little bit of this Darwinian philosophy that had come out, where he's just saying we should value humanity. We should actually value humanity as being this very, very special, very unique, concept. And then we should also recognize that there was someone who was the best of us. And not just that, he goes on to argue not from biblical scripture, but from here is the elements of history leading up to what ultimately is the crucifixion. But what I want to, pitch to you guys, and Wes, especially you, with Edmund Burke, who wrote the Sublime and the Beautiful. Chesterton says that art is what makes, that is man's signature on life. Right when you start looking at the history of mankind and you see their earliest activities, you see them making artwork, even if it's only in a cave. Yeah. Which is, we don't find that anywhere else with any other creature. So right when we're looking at history, we're already seeing a story being played out, where we don't understand all of human history, but right when we see it hit the map, they're making artwork. Yeah. And I'd like to know how you feel that artwork plays into, say, Burke's thought,
sure,
or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, I think you nailed the description of him. Is he was this intellectual giant. G.K. Chesterton was this literary giant, but he also had this humor that was like a child. I wanted to share a story real quick, which was that I had read this one time that he was having this debate with some atheist, right? Guy who was speaking in public and talking about how he was postmodern, before there was a postmodern thing. And so this atheist guy was out there saying, hey, we can't actually know if anything's real. There's no scientific way to be able to deduce what is and is not reality. It could all be made up. And while he's talking, G.K. Chesterton kicked a rock at him and it hit him in the face. And he was like, that was real. Just so you know, reality will smack you in the face. That's him, right? He knew how to make his point succinctly and at times very powerfully, right? That was Chesterton, and he did, very much like C.S. Lewis, because when you talk about art and it being part of our nature, C.S. Lewis, I remember, you're talking about in Christian circles, I remember Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and hearing that when I was a kid, and reading those stories, and I was like, oh, those are nice, and I kind of thought of C.S. Lewis as this Dr. Seuss, person for Christians, I guess. And then I read later on in life, when I was in college, I read more of C.S. Lewis, and I was like, holy cow, this guy was so deep, when you get into his other works and books and stuff, and you're like, he was a genius in addition to having, books that are written more for for kids and younger folks. And I think it's
Yeah.
the same thing with Chesterton, is that he had this artistic nature in addition to this deep intellect. And how cool
Yeah.
is that? And that extends to Edmund Burke himself, is, Burke being a statesman, being a philosopher, and all those things. He was very, very intellectually astute, but he was also very appreciative of the nature of art. So that brings me to your question, which is art central to our identity? And I think it is, because we're made in the image of God, and God in the first chapters of Genesis is a creator, and not just a hey, let's get it done, but also it is good, right? It is beautiful. He's taking his time, as these days or eras pass, whatever you want to say, is he's doing it in this beautiful way, and he's taking time to rest and enjoy his creation. I mean, that is the sign of a masterful artist, and if we are made in his image, then it has to be central
Hmm.
to our identity. So I think that goes, with any author, and it goes with any person, is to recognize that included in our perspective, but Chesterton most of all, for sure. So what are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah.
Uh, well, I have some, but John, were you about to look like you were about to respond there?
Just wanted to say that like some of my favorite philosophers are also like good writers in regards to like they write their own stories, they write their own fiction. On one hand, they'll be able to just go toe to toe in a debate about any significant issue about existence, and on the other hand, like they'll write a very easygoing fantasy novel or fictional novel. And then the artist and the philosopher just go hand in hand. And that was definitely Chesterton, Ed, as well as Lewis.
Yeah, he was, Wes, you mentioned a literary giant, also in some sense a physical giant. And I think you've both commented on his way. I wished I should have looked it up. I cannot remember his title. It was either the Saint of Wit or the Saint of Mirth or something to that effect. He was known for someone who brought this mirth to a situation, and it wasn't just because he happened to be a funny person. He was, but it was something he reveled in and something that he felt was deeply important. John, I have not read The Everlasting Man. I've read his book Orthodoxy. I would highly recommend.
Yeah.
Very short, very easy to get through. Probably the most unique apologetics work I've ever read. And it's a childlike mind that wrote it. I mean, it's a very mature mind, but it's also one that is very curious in a way that I think some of us adults have lost. What I also think is interesting, kind of tying this to Burkean conservatism, is I think there's a lot of precursors of a foundation for Burkeanism found in Chesterton also.
Oh, yeah.
In Orthodoxy, he talks a great deal about it's bizarre. It's like he's making a Burkean argument. He talks about that we have no historical record for social contract theory, that we don't have an actual historical record where two guys get together and say, hey, I'm not going to hit you if you don't hit me, or this notion that we found our societies on consent. He says what we do have a record for is those who would say, we must not hit each other in this holy place.
Mm.
And he kind of makes this point that those who sought their religion found their society.
Mm-hmm.
In effect, that there is a sense in which these things become consensual at some point, but that we don't found them in consent. We actually found them in something deeper. And this is, I say Burke, it's also a Russell Kirk idea that the cult is built on the cult, or the culture is built on the cult. That you begin first with your shared kind of convictions about the nature of who we are and what our ultimate purpose is, and from that we can start to build things like consent. And it oftentimes left-wing doctrines try to skip that very necessary Chestertonian first step and just start with a program. Okay, well, let's all agree to this thing, and miss some of what makes us human in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what kind of grounded America a little bit versus, say, the French Republic, right? Is in America, we at least had this notion that these rights that we talk about all the time, we at least grounded them in God. Nature's God, as Jefferson said, which was still somewhat of a deist concept, but at least it was this recognition that we don't invent them ourselves, right? And that starts to steer us back to an appreciation into natural law and to the way that God made the world, right? But I agree with you. Burke is a person who appreciates the mystery of how God did what he did. and he doesn't, say it had to be this way or it had to be that way. He's open to discussion, and I think Chesterton does that as well. Is one of the things that John, you and I have talked about before, is he kind of helps you make a distinction between contradiction and paradox, right?
Yeah.
Contradiction being, two things that can't possibly be true at the same time, whereas paradox is two things that don't appear to be true at the same time, but they are, right? Like Jesus
Right.
being man and being God. It's a paradox. He is at the same time. It's not a contradiction, but those exist together. And there's so
Hmm.
many, he says when you encounter something that confuses you in life, is it a contradiction or could it be a paradox? And you wrestle with it and you start to uncover it. And many times you'll find that there are these fascinating paradoxes in life, that God has planted for us to discover. And that just opens you up to this whole mystery of exploring the universe and all the different things that God has built with an awe
Yeah.
and inspiration that Chesterton clearly had.
That's actually why part of the reason why he really enjoyed writing mystery novels, like the Sherlock Holmes novels and things like that. Like he wrote a whole series of Father Brown, you know,
Right.
small short stories of this like priest who ends up becoming a detective throughout like different points in his life. And there's just something about the mystery. But even though things might get heavy, like it might be murder or something, there's still like a jovial nature, a jovial tone throughout the whole thing. So if
Mm.
you're looking for someone like grave and serious, like you're probably going to have to look elsewhere because this guy is, I wouldn't even call him an optimist either because, and I'll get to that in one second, but like it's one who is just, he's so excited to see what God has for him next and what God has for humanity next. And when you talk about the paradoxes, he culminates the everlasting man with, of course, the paradox of how can God forsake himself? How does God turn his back on himself and sacrifice himself to himself? But yet that becomes like the center of history, and it always has been and always will be the center of history. So where I like to kind of merge, G.K. Chesterton and Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke has this honor of all of history and how it's built up the institutions that we have. We value that in the present. We value each other in the present, and we also value it for our future because we know that we're not going to be forever, but there will be others who come after us who inherit what we have given and what we have. And G.K. Chesterton helps to be able to like put those markers in what inspires us to keep on going. I mean, when you said about, art, Wes and Josh, that y'all are right, because Chesterton's one of his main theses in The Everlasting Man is that right when you see mankind, you not only see artwork, you see artwork about religion, right? So most of these, civilizations that have progressed, they progressed because they started asking the deeper questions. It doesn't have to be about Christianity. It could be about anything, but they ask the deeper meanings about their own ethics, about morality, about each other, and about their place in the world.
Yeah.
And it's religion that is that value that should be valued. And even in his day, he said that value is being lost. It's no longer being appreciated. And I think too, this is a whole nother conversation, but I think the church has something to do with that value and that appreciation being lost and not being perpetuated. I think they're responsible for it in different ways.
Yeah.
But that it was his main thesis, was that religion helps progress that forward.
Makes me think of that movie with Denzel Washington, The Book of Eli, where like everybody's fighting over the last copy of the Bible because they desperately want some sense of religion in an otherwise, post-apocalyptic world. And I think Chesterton would love something like that. Like he got it. So it's fascinating discussion.
Definitely.
And I guess the last point here before we close out is that sense of mystery about the world, that sense of jovialness, even in the face of, danger and terrible things that were coming, right? I think it's something that we have to recover as Christians, as conservatives, however you see yourself, as Americans, as human beings, frankly. It seems like so many times in the world, we just get lost in the news cycle and it's all depressing, or, Joe Biden is president, oh, the world's going to crap. Like we get in these notions where it seems like everything is just spiraling down and there's nothing we can do. And I feel like Facebook and, every other social media platform is pulling us in these terrible directions that we don't need to be. And, they're only telling you parts of the story and not the whole thing. And they're at no point does it seem like they're actually giving you some affirmation, of who you are truly, in the eyes of God and under his purposes and designed as his artwork, right? We have to
Yeah.
reconnect back to that, and that's why we need people like Chesterton today, you know, to inspire us and things like that. And maybe it's not books because very few people read anymore, but we have to find ways to bring that message to be able to get out of a sense of despair, you know. So
Mhm. I think that one thing that I'd like to close out with is if y'all have a chance, if this y'all could do this, knock this out in about maybe 15 minutes. But if y'all read G.K. Chesterton's introduction to the Book of Job, it's a really, really thoughtful piece. Just because, again, he brings that childlike spirit to it, and not the moralistic, like let's find the meaning of Job right here, right now. If anything, like he kind of compares it almost to Alice in Wonderland, where like so many people try to read Alice in Wonderland and they're trying to get this or that meaning out of it, this or that lesson to be learned out of it. And really, you're just supposed to read it to appreciate the wonder of it. There's not much more than just life is this huge mystery, and God is almost in awe of what He's created Himself, such that like He's almost become like an atheist himself in the book, being like, because Job is like, why me, God, and why this and why that, and God's like, I know, right? Why? Like, look at this. Why? Like, isn't that? And Chesterton holds this view that God is saying that almost in a sense of like God Himself is a childlike wonder about His own creation. He makes no attempt to really answer Job's sufferings except to say, you think that's mysterious about your suffering? I can give you a million other mysteries, alongside your suffering. So he defeats the optimist by saying, oh, everything's going to be all right in the end because God's got a plan. And he defeats the pessimist in Job, who says like, this is happening for this and that reason, and God's against me and that sort of thing. God's like, no, you need to like just hold on for the ride that is this life. The ups, the downs, the good and the bad.
yeah.
And if I can like make any sort of recommendation for, I guess, 2021, it's that like not everything is certain, and I think we want comfort so often with all these uncertainties about sickness, about, weather, about when can I feel normal again. And part of it is, I think that you find that meaning, you find closeness to God in the questions, in the riddles of life, and sometimes in the uncertainties. I think that's where you find that He's working, He's active, and it's something that you can be part of. But it's not to understand everything as it is to just join in and appreciate this crazy life that we've been given.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is when I see like my kids, and like they
Yeah.
they come home with something from school, and they've like scribbled their name in, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing, and like I understand it, yes, okay, they wrote their name, but like I'm still, you did that, you're 3 years old, like that's great, and they're so proud of it, and there's this like experience of wonder is like, holy cow, this child was just a baby, just a few months ago, and now she's like writing her name, and I'm like, well, it's amazing. What have I done?
The
Like,
GK, like,
and I'm
my wife
responsible
and I,
for her. Like,
my wife and I were talking. Like, my wife was like, "Do you want a fourth kid?" I'm like, "The G.K. Chesterton in me wants a fourth kid. Why? Because like there's nothing here." And then like 9 months later, like there's somebody, like that's wild. That is wild, But like that's the Chesterton in life right there. Is just like there was nothing, and there was something. You can do that right now. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to.
all right. Well, I do want to close it out. So, Josh, any final comments before we head out for the week?
Gosh, I don't know if I could add too much. I think, John, you hit it on the head with that sense of wonder. I mean, mirth and wonder were the two things I think Chesterton is probably the most known for. And, he said once, if I get it right, where religion is gone, reason is going, because they're both made of the same material. They're means of proof that cannot themselves be proven. And it's always kind of stuck with me. I think we commoditize religion. I think we westernize it. I think we try to get a sense of it, to pull it down from the heavens.
Yeah.
But I think that childlike wonder that Chesterton had of putting, and he wasn't just pro-religion. There's a lot of nonsense in religion. He wrote an entire book called Heresy, I think, or Heretics.
Yeah, heretics, yeah.
But a sound, a good, a faithful religion, I think would go a long way in curing a lot of the ills we're facing.
Yeah, it's well said, man. It's well said. It's a great summary too. Well, thank you guys. This is fun to be able to get into some of these topics and to get into some of these deeper, authors and and movers and shakers within, the Christian movement, conservative movement, but just amazing in themselves in any respect. So thank you guys so much. So for those watching this show, don't forget theberkenconservative.com is our website. You can watch more episodes like this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got it all. And then if there's somebody that you want us to review, if you've got a favorite author, whether it could be C.S. Lewis, it could be someone totally different, could be Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter to us. We'd love to be able to dissect them, analyze them, and have a great discussion with you. So, John, thanks so much for what you do on the channel. It's great to see you every week. And then, Josh, thanks for being our guest. We love having you on, brother. Good luck with Saving Elephants, your podcast, all the amazing work that you're doing. Folks, be sure to check that out as well. An amazing resource for some awesome content. And then I will hopefully see you guys next week. So take care.
Definitely.